We are in The Manipulated Mind by Denise Wynn, and beginning chapter 6, Attitude Influence. Removal of their leader left them without a clearly defined authority structure and weakened group cohesion. The Chinese, by pacing their demands and only making large requests after being granted small ones, imperceptibly won their commitment. They were forced to participate in their own indoctrination process by writing statements of organizing camp activities. Need for friendship and approval led them to comply with their jailers. If the ordinary human brain had not possessed a special capacity of adaptation to an ever-changing environment, building up ever-changing conditioned reflexes and patterns of responses and submitting for the first time, being when further resistance seemed useless, mankind would never have survived to become the dominant animal. The person with deficient powers of adaptation and excessive rigidity in behavior or thought is always in danger of breaking down, entering a mental hospital, or becoming a chronic neurotic. So said William Sargent in Battle for the Mind, and although there are plenty of people prepared to take issue with this particular version of the causes of mental illness, notably psychiatrists such as Thomas Szasz and Ronald Lang and their followers, who maintain that the sickness is within society and the insane individual is in reality the only real sane one who won't adapt to that sickness. There is a basic truth in the fact that ability to adjust to a changing environment is the secret of survival. Therefore, according to Brown, in Techniques of Persuasion, it is far from surprising that it is those designated statistically normal who are most likely to take on the attitudes that are prevalent in their social milieu and to drop them in favor of others when the milieu changes. In line with his own belief, described in Chapter 2, that all individuals have deeply entrenched attitudes derived from personal character traits and more superficial attitudes which are alterable according to current climate of opinion, Brown concludes that we are both more rigid and more malleable than has hitherto been supposed, rigid in our basic personality pattern and malleable within certain limits determined by basic patterns in our peripheral personality, whose various roles alter as we move from one group to another. He commented that such normal adaptation to group norms was a saving grace for some in Korea. So long as the morale of a group of prisoners remained intact, the Chinese were virtually powerless to influence it. They had to concentrate on breaking down the group. While some attitude changes may be crucial for survival, a man who believes that his environment has been adversely affected by the invention of the motor car would not survive long if he attempted to ignore its existence, particularly when crossing roads. Others may be maladaptive. If it is normal to change attitudes, it is, however, considerably less advantageous to do so in some circumstances rather than others. But because we tend to believe in the concept of autonomy, we may not realize quite the degree to which our attitude changes or our behavior are not the product of our own decision making. Psychological research has revealed the power of forces that are way beyond normal conscious control, and yet which can have, in some instances, far-reaching destructive effects. An attitude has been defined as having three component parts: affect, cognition, and behavior. The affective component refers to an individual's evaluation of, liking for, or emotional response to a person, thing, or concept. The cognitive component comprises his beliefs or knowledge about that person, thing, or concept. The behavioral component covers the way he actually acts towards the person or thing or as a result of holding the concept. Zimbardo points out in Influencing Attitudes and Changing Behavior, any deliberate attempts made to change people's attitudes have to work on all three elements. A technique that affects one's emotional beliefs but not one's actions is not completely effective. This chapter will look in detail at a number of the discoveries that have been made about attitude change and methods of influencing behavior, but it will concentrate on those areas where the influence is a subtle one and its effects on a person unconscious. While fully acknowledging that television or direct political appeals have influencing powers, that more overt form of influence is not under discussion here. Obedience to authority. A person who, with inner conviction, loathes stealing, killing, and assault, may find himself performing these acts with relative ease when commanded by authority. Behavior that is unthinkable in an individual who is acting on his own may be executed without hesitation when carried out under orders. Facts of recent history and observation in daily life suggest that for many people, obedience may be a deeply ingrained behavior tendency, indeed a prepotent impulse overriding training or ethics, sympathy, and moral conduct. Professor Stanley Milgram wrote these words in the Introduction to Obedience to Authority, the published account of an experiment which left shock waves rippling throughout the world. He had discovered that thinking man does not always make decisions in a rational way. In fact, sometimes is totally incapable of it. Circumstances and deeply entrenched behavior traits can radically affect right judgment. Milgram's experiment involved 300,000 people in an attempt to find out whether punishment had advantageous effects on learning, or that was what the subjects were told. In fact, the real goal of the experiment was to find out about the behavior of the subjects themselves in a particularly stressful situation. 40 people took part in each experiment, and each time volunteers were divided so that there would be 40% working class, 40% white collar, and 20% from professional classes, the age ranging from mid-20s to mid-40s. The first series of experiments was carried out at Yale University, where Milgram worked, and the volunteers were solicited through local papers in New Haven, an incentive being that they would receive a fee for taking part. Each volunteer was paired with another person, supposedly another volunteer, but in reality a confederate of the experimenter. The real volunteer was to act as teacher and the confederate as learner. The teacher had to help the learner learn a long list of word pairs and then test his memory. If the learner got one wrong, he was to receive an electric shock, which the teacher would deliver by pressing a switch on the shock generator in front of him, to which the learner was wired in another room. The intensity of the shocks ranged from 15 to 450 volts, and there were 30 switches in all. Every ensuing time the learner made a mistake, the shocks were to increase progressively in intensity. The teachers were all given a sample 45-volt shock before beginning, so that their belief that the generator was actually switched on would be assured. In fact, of course, the learner never received any shocks at all, but he always responded in the following way. At 75 volts, he would grunt in discomfort. At 120 volts, he would complain. At 150, if anyone got that far, he would demand to be released from the experiment. At 285, he was to emit an agonized scream, whereafter nothing would be heard from him again. And we'll stop it right there, and we will pick up with part 2 of chapter 6, Attitude Influence of the Manipulated Mind by Denise Wynn, in the next video. See you there.